Tycoon faces the ultimate betrayal. Twins' DNA test uncovers explosive secrets. The mist lay thick over the valleys of Lisburg, casting a ghostly veil over its soaring turrets and gleaming silver spires. The dawn sun struggled to break through the heavy clouds, painting the sky in a bruised blend of lavender and steel gray. In the heart of the mountains stood a castle vast, cold, and magnificent, known by all as the Seat of Silver. From there, the most powerful man in the realm watched the world below like a god surveying his dominion. Duke Tyrell Lisburg, Lord of the Northern Territories, stood at the high balcony, his cloak fluttering against the wind. His dark eyes were fixed on the horizon, though his mind was elsewhere, locked in the same spiral it had wandered for years. What is legacy if not the illusion of control? He had built everything with his bare hands, not with tools, but with strategy, iron will, and political brilliance. He was no ordinary noble. Tyrell was a merchant lord turned aristocrat, a man who had clawed his way into the ancient bloodlines by force and fortune. The veins of his lands were rich with silver, and that silver bought him power, titles, and the reluctant admiration of the old houses. "Your Grace," a soft voice broke through his thoughts. He didn't turn. He knew that voice too well. His steward, old and bent, but still loyal. "Yes, Emmerich, the council awaits your word. The tariffs from the southern pass." "Let them wait," Tyrell murmured, voice as cold as the stone beneath his boots. A long silence passed. The steward, used to these moods, bowed and withdrew. Alone once more, Tyrell inhaled deeply. Below the castle walls, miners were already at work. Tiny figures, breaking the bones of the mountains to feed the ambitions of their lord. That silver would one day belong to his heir, or heirs if fortune proved generous. And yet, fortune had been difficult lately. In his study, maps and scrolls covered every surface. His eyes trailed over the detailed lineages he had commissioned. Every noble family in the kingdom, every marriageable daughter, every alliance worth forging. His own marriage, 5 winters past, had been such an arrangement. Lady Elora of House Velden, a noble name, a woman of intelligence and poise, but not affection. Tyrell had respected her, admired her even, but he had never loved her, nor she him. Their union had been forged on paper, not passion. And yet, when she had walked into the grand hall that first day, dressed in silk the color of storm clouds, eyes defiant, he had felt something stir in him. Not warmth, no, not love, but challenge. Their marriage was civil, often quiet, always formal. She fulfilled her duties with grace. She attended the feasts, smiled when expected, and held her tongue at court. She never embarrassed him, never questioned his authority. But in private, there was a distance no silver could cross. He remembered one night, years ago, during a snowstorm that had trapped them inside the keep for days. They had stood by the fire in silence, the only sound the crackling of logs. "You don't trust easily, do you?" she had asked, her voice low. He had looked at her, something flickering behind his eyes. "Trust is for fools, and I did not marry you to be a fool." She hadn't looked away. "Then why did you marry me?" Tyrell had paused, choosing his words with care. "Because I needed someone who wouldn't break." That was the closest they had ever come to vulnerability. And yet, despite the coldness between them, something miraculous had occurred. Elora had fallen pregnant, not with one child but 2, twins. The castle had erupted in celebration. The bells rang for hours, echoing across the valleys. Lords sent gifts. Clerics declared it a sign of divine favor. Tyrell had simply stood in the tower again, watching the sunrise, his expression unreadable. His blood would continue. He had named them both before they were even born. The boy would be Kalen, the girl Saren. Strong names, names that would one day rule kingdoms. But as the months passed and the day of birth drew near, something uneasy crept into Tyrell's heart. He found himself waking in the middle of the night, haunted by dreams of faceless children and whispers in corridors. Elora had grown distant, more distant than usual. She walked the halls in silence, her hand always on her swollen belly, her eyes unreadable. "Is something troubling you?" he had asked her once. She had paused, staring into the fireplace. "Do you ever wonder if legacy is more than blood?" Tyrell had stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she hesitated. "Do you think a man's worth is measured by what he leaves behind? Or by how he is remembered?" He had not answered. That night, he had returned to the balcony. The wind had howled like a beast, and the stars had hidden behind a curtain of fog. He felt a chill in his bones, the kind that no fire could chase away. Something was changing, something he couldn't control. A few weeks later, the twins were born. Healthy, beautiful, the boy with his dark eyes, the girl with a smile that could melt the stone of the castle walls. And yet, when Tyrell held them for the first time, something inside him shifted. He stared at them, one in each arm, and his breath caught in his throat. The girl had his eyes, but the boy, there was something different, a softness, a warmth that didn't belong to him. He looked at Elora, who lay pale and exhausted in the bed, watching him with unreadable eyes. In that moment, something ancient and cold took root in Tyrell's heart, doubt. And from that doubt, the first seeds of betrayal were sown. But inside, behind the closed doors of the East Wing, that perfection had begun to crack. 5 years had passed since the birth of the twins. 5 years of silence stretched thin, of polite dinners and icy exchanges, of public unity and private erosion. The children had grown under the care of nannies and tutors, raised in separate quarters according to Tyrell's design. He insisted it was strategy, that a divided education would yield twice the strength. But in truth, he feared something he couldn't name. He had begun to watch them. Kalen, the boy, was dutiful, obedient, structured. He walked with a soldier's spine and rarely spoke unless spoken to. He mirrored Tyrell's cold efficiency. But Saren laughed. She wandered through the frost-covered gardens barefoot, spoke to servants by name, and painted in the old chapel where the light hit the stained glass just right. Her presence disturbed the stillness Tyrell so carefully curated. It unsettled him in a way he didn't understand. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky in hues of bruised purple, Tyrell stood at the edge of the old gallery, watching her. She was perched on a low stool, brush in hand, humming softly to herself as she painted a sun over the mountains. Her eyes sparkled with a kind of joy that did not belong in this castle. He stepped forward, his voice a quiet blade. "Where did you learn to paint like that?" Saren turned, startled, but smiled. "I didn't learn. I just remember." "Remember?" She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mama used to show me how when I was very small, before you made her stop." His jaw tightened. "I never forbade her from anything." Saren tilted her head, her expression oddly knowing. "Not with words." He felt something shift inside him, like a door creaking open to a room he had sealed long ago. Later that night, he found himself in the archives, his fingers tracing the edge of a canvas buried beneath dust. It was a portrait, unfinished, vibrant, and unmistakable. The signature at the bottom, L. Airden, a name once whispered with admiration across courts and cities. A common-born artist who had gained brief fame, only to vanish from court after an unnamed scandal. Tyrell had once heard his name in passing, long before the wedding. The man had painted Elora's likeness, and now, staring at the brush strokes, the way the light captured her smile, he saw something else, something terrifying. The softness of the eyes, the curve of the mouth. It matched the shape of Kalen's face, not Saren's. He dropped the frame. The sound echoed like a crack of thunder. He couldn't sleep that night. The fire roared, but it did nothing to thaw the ice tightening around his chest. In the darkness, he sat at his desk, pen trembling in his fingers. "To the Brotherhood of the Eye," he wrote, "send word to Alchemist Verith. I require his services in private. It concerns the blood of my house." 3 days passed in excruciating silence. Elora avoided him, sensing the shift in his energy. The children continued their lessons, unaware of the storm building above them. On the fourth day, Vareth arrived under the cover of snow, his face hidden behind a thick cowl. He smelled of myrrh and ash, and his fingers were stained from years of ink and strange powders. Tyrell met him in the observatory, far from ears, far from light. "I want certainty," he said, pacing. "Not rumor, not suspicion. I want truth, Vareth. Do you understand?" Vareth's voice was thin and papery. "I will need strands of hair, both children, and something of your own. The process is delicate. Discretion is paramount," Tyrell said sharply. "No one must know." That night, as the castle slept beneath the weight of snow, Tyrell entered the children's chambers himself. He moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate. From Kaelin, he took a small lock of hair from beneath the boy's pillow. From Saren, a ribbon she had worn, tangled with stray strands of auburn. His hand trembled when he added a vial of his own blood to the satchel. He handed the items to Vareth without a word and turned away, unable to watch the alchemist depart. For the next week, the air in the castle thickened. Elora watched her husband with wary eyes. She spoke little, and when she did, her voice carried steel beneath velvet. "You're quieter than usual," she said one morning at breakfast. As snow drifted beyond the tall windows, Tyrell sipped his tea without meeting her gaze. Contemplative. About what? He didn't answer, but that night, as the fires burned low and shadows danced across the stone walls, he heard footsteps behind him. "I know what you did," Elora said, her voice low but not accusing. "You summoned the alchemist." He didn't move. "Then you know why." "I do. And I pity you for it." His breath hitched. "You think I betrayed you," she continued, "because you've never known how to accept love freely given. So you search for enemies where there are none." He turned, finally, his face etched in stone. "Tell me then, Elora, do both children belong to me?" A long silence stretched between them, the kind that could collapse mountains. "I have never lied to you," she said softly. "But you've never asked the right questions." He stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "What does that mean?" "It means," she whispered, "you'll have your answer soon enough, and when you do, remember who taught you how to be a father." Then she left him, again, standing alone in the dark. The next morning, a raven arrived, Vareth's seal. Tyrell stared at the scroll for what felt like an eternity before breaking the wax. His eyes scanned the words, heart pounding louder with every line. His knees buckled. Only one of the children carried his blood, and it was not the one he had feared. It was the girl, Saren. The boy Kaelin was not his son. Tyrell's vision blurred. The scroll dropped from his hands, drifting like a leaf to the floor. In that moment, his world, so carefully constructed, so meticulously designed, shattered. And in the silence that followed, only one thought screamed through his mind. Which betrayal was worse? The one in her heart, or the one he planted in his own? He hadn't moved in hours. The great hall, once a chamber of pride and power, now felt like a tomb. The echoes of his steps as he finally stood rang hollow. The silence gnawed at him, louder than thunder. His son, his heir, his mirror was not his. His hand curled into a fist. A quiet, slow breath hissed through his teeth. He wanted to scream. He wanted to destroy something. But instead, he stood frozen, numb, as if his veins had turned to ice. Then a voice, small, tentative, broke through the silence. "Father!" He turned sharply. Kaelin stood at the threshold of the hall, wrapped in a deep green cloak. His dark hair fell just above his brows, and his eyes, those eyes, Tyrell saw them now for what they were. Stranger's eyes. "Yes." His voice came out rougher than he meant. Kaelin took a step forward. "You weren't at training this morning." Tyrell hesitated. "I had matters to attend to." The boy frowned slightly. "But you always watch." A strange ache settled in Tyrell's chest. He had watched. Every morning, every practice. He had corrected Kaelin's stance, taught him how to hold a blade, how to read a battlefield. He had poured himself into the boy. Now every memory of those moments twisted in his gut. I needed the time alone, he said, turning away. Kalen stepped closer, hesitant. Did I do something wrong? Tyrell's hands clenched at his sides. His breath caught in his throat. No, but something's changed, Kalen said quietly. You look at me differently. Tyrell turned slowly. His eyes met the boy's, and the truth of his torment was clear there, in those eyes that mirrored not his own, but someone else's. Some ghost of a man who had once touched what belonged to Tyrell. You are not at fault, Tyrell said, and even he was surprised by the softness in his voice. Go, rest. We'll speak another day. Kalen lingered for a moment longer before bowing slightly and leaving the hall. As the boy's footsteps faded, Tyrell let out a strangled breath and moved to the cabinet in the far corner. From a hidden compartment, he pulled out a heavy, gilded box. Inside, wrapped in silk, lay an old brooch, worn with time, its emerald stone cracked. He hadn't looked at it in years. It had belonged to Elora, given to her by a man named Lyron Airden, a name Tyrell had buried. His hand trembled as he closed the box again. He could no longer avoid what needed to be done. He stormed down the hallways with purpose now, his cloak sweeping behind him like a shadow. Elora stood in the western garden, cloaked in white wool, her hair braided with pearl threads. She turned when she heard him approach, her eyes calm, too calm. I take it you read the alchemist's letter, she said before he could speak. You knew, he growled, voice low, venomous. You knew the moment you saw him. That boy does not carry my blood. No, she replied, her tone even. He does not. The words landed like a blade between them. No flinch, no denial, just truth, pure and cold. Then why? He whispered. Why pretend? Why carry on this lie for 5 years? Elora stepped toward him, the snow crunching beneath her boots. Because he needed a father. Because you needed a reason to care about something beyond yourself. And because I wanted to believe we could become something better through him. Tyrell stared at her, jaw clenched. You thought deceiving me would make me better? I thought love might, she said quietly. He laughed bitterly. You speak of love? You betrayed me, with a common artist. She held his gaze. I married you because I had no choice. You offered security, not affection. I gave you loyalty. But before that, before I became your prize, I loved someone. A man with paint on his hands and laughter in his chest. Lyron. Tyrell spat the name like poison. Yes, she answered. He gave me something you never could. A glimpse of freedom. Freedom. Tyrell's voice rose. You were a duchess. You had lands, jewels, titles. And still you clung to the memory of a man who couldn't even keep a roof over his head. Elora's voice dropped, laced with quiet fury. He gave me a son who looks at the world with wonder, who doesn't know how to hate, who still believes in kindness, in truth. Can you say the same for yourself? Tyrell turned away, the weight of her words pressing against his chest like iron. He's not mine, he whispered. No, she said, but he still calls you father. Isn't that worth something? Silence hung heavy between them. I should cast you out, Tyrell muttered. Both of you. Elora didn't flinch. You could, but you won't. He turned back to her, furious. Why not? Because a man like you doesn't destroy what he's built, she said. And whether you like it or not, Kalen is part of that. He's a symbol. He's your heir in the eyes of every noble in this realm. Do you want to explain why he isn't? Tyrell's breath came sharp and ragged. And Saren? He asked. The one who is mine. You hid the truth from her, too. I didn't want her to grow up feeling she had to earn your love, Elora said. She already carried your blood. She shouldn't have to carry your burdens, too. Tyrell was silent, frozen in place. Everything he thought he understood, his family, his legacy, his future, was unraveling around him. He stepped back from her, shaking his head. This changes everything. Elora's gaze softened. Only if you let it. Tyrell turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like war drums. Back in his private chambers, he stood at the window once more. Below, Saren danced in the snow, her arms stretched wide, laughing as flakes melted on her cheeks. She turned toward the window, as if sensing him, and waved. And for a moment, just a moment, he felt something crack inside him. Not anger, not shame, but something deeper. He raised a hand slowly and waved back. Servants moved faster than usual. Heads bowed. Eyes darted to the floor. There was something in the air, the kind of tension that precedes storms and executions. Rumors had started. They always did when something was off in the rhythm of the great halls. A missed council meeting, a cold silence between the Duke and Duchess, the absence of the boy in the training yard, the slight shift in the way Tyrell's guards held their blades, closer to their belts, ready. The nobility of Lysburg had survived wars and plagues, but it was gossip that ran its veins red. 2 kitchen maids whispered behind the old wine casks. "They say the twins aren't really twins," one murmured wide-eyed. "No," the other hissed, almost giddy with fear. "They say the Duke had the girl tested, that she's his, but the boy—" The first maid gasped. "But the boy is to inherit everything." "Exactly. And if he's not the true heir—" They didn't finish the thought. They didn't have to. In this castle, blood wasn't just thicker than water, it was law. It was the blade that crowned kings and toppled houses. Upstairs, Tyrell sat in his study, a place that once gave him comfort, now filled with the weight of secrets too heavy to bear. The fire crackled but didn't warm him. He stared into nothing, the same name echoing in his mind like a curse. Lyran Erden. He hadn't heard it in years, but now it clung to everything. Every look from Elora, every twitch of Kaelin's smile. His hand hovered above a sealed letter. An invitation, no, a demand, to the noble houses for a winter feast. One he had planned months ago. A celebration of the twins' 6th birthday. A show of legacy, of power. Now it felt like a lie he couldn't afford to tell. The door creaked. It was his steward, Emmerich. Loyal, discreet, ancient as the stones. "Speak," Tyrell said without looking. "There's talk in the lower halls, my lord," Emmerich said carefully. "About the children." Of course there was. Secrets in this place had a way of growing teeth. "And?" Tyrell asked, voice low. "Some claim the Lady Elora was seen receiving letters from beyond the border. A man bearing the crest of the Free Artists Guild." Tyrell's jaw tightened. "She still writes to him," he murmured. It wasn't a question. It was realization. Emmerich bowed. "It may be nothing, but the servants grow restless." "Then remind them who feeds them," Tyrell snapped, though the bitterness in his voice wasn't aimed at the steward. "Remind them where their loyalty lies." "Yes, my lord." Tyrell stood suddenly, the force of his movement toppling a glass of wine that shattered across the stone floor. He didn't even flinch. "Send for her," he ordered. "Now." Within the hour, Elora stood before him in the study, her face unreadable, hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked like a statue, graceful, cold, eternal. "You've been writing to him," Tyrell said without preamble. Her eyes didn't blink. "Yes, you admit it. I have nothing to hide from you anymore." His breath caught. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was tired. "What could you possibly still need from him?" he asked, pacing. "Closure? Romance? A memory you refuse to let rot?" "He's Kaelin's father," she said gently. "He has a right to know his son." Tyrell stopped dead in his tracks. His heart thundered. "He is not his father," he growled. "I raised him. I taught him. I gave him a name, a home, a future. You gave him your discipline," Elora said, "but not your warmth, because deep down you always suspected he wasn't yours. And now that you know, you want to erase him like a mistake." Tyrell slammed his fist onto the desk. "He is a mistake." The words rang out like a whip. Elora flinched, only slightly, but enough to wound him deeper than any sword ever had. A long, painful silence followed. Tyrell's voice, when it came again, was lower, harsher. "I should exile him, send him away before the feast." before the nobles arrive. End this quietly. You could, Elora said, her eyes shining. Not with tears, but with fury contained. But you won't, because whatever hatred you feel for me, you don't feel it for him. Not truly. Tyrell turned away. His shoulders were rigid, hands trembling at his sides. You think I love him? He asked, almost a whisper. A child born of betrayal? Elora stepped closer. I think you already do, and it terrifies you. His silence was the only answer. That night, he wandered the empty corridors like a ghost. He found himself outside Kaelin's chamber. The door was ajar. He peered inside. Kaelin sat by the fire, knees tucked to his chest, staring into the flames. Are you afraid of fire? The boy asked suddenly, without turning. You always stare at it like it's going to eat you. Tyrell entered slowly. Fire doesn't eat. It cleanses. Kaelin looked up, confused. Cleanses? Tyrell nodded, sitting beside him. The silence stretched, but not uncomfortably. Do you know why I taught you to fight? He asked. Kaelin hesitated. Because I'm your heir. Tyrell looked at the boy, really looked at him. The curve of his jaw, the way his fingers fidgeted, the flicker of sadness he didn't yet know how to hide. No, Tyrell said quietly. I taught you because I wanted you to be strong. Strong enough to survive this world, even if I'm not beside you. Kaelin's eyes searched his face. Why wouldn't you be? Tyrell didn't answer. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, firm, unfamiliar, but steady. You may hear things soon. About me. About yourself. About your mother. I want you to remember something. Kaelin nodded, wide-eyed. No matter what blood runs in your veins, I chose to raise you. That matters. More than anything. The boy nodded again, his lips trembling. But he said nothing. Tyrell left the chamber, his heart heavier than before. And in the shadows of the upper balcony, unseen by either of them, Saren watched. She hadn't meant to spy, but she had heard everything. And for the first time in her young life, she realized the truth wasn't just painful. It was dangerous. Tyrell stood before the mirror in his private chamber, unmoving. He stared at his reflection with unfamiliar eyes. There were fine lines now around his mouth, at the corners of his eyes, too deep for his age. His once dark hair had thinned at the temples, and, though his posture remained proud, something inside him had slumped, just slightly. It was not age. It was disillusion. He touched the glass as if trying to reach through it. Beyond it was the version of himself he once believed in, calculated, invincible, untouched by sentiment. But the reflection no longer obeyed that illusion. A knock came, hesitant. 3 soft taps. He didn't respond. The door creaked open anyway. It was Saren, wrapped in a velvet cloak, her auburn curls still damp from the mist outside. Her cheeks were flushed from running, eyes bright. Not with joy, but with urgency. I need to speak with you, she said, stepping into the room. Tyrell blinked, pulled back from the mirror. You should be in the study hall. I was, she said, but I heard something, in the lower gallery. He turned slowly, his heart beginning to stir with unease. She stepped closer. 2 guards were talking. They said Kaelin wasn't, that he wasn't. She struggled to finish the sentence. They said he wasn't your son. The silence was immediate, sharp. Tyrell looked down at her. She was small, but her eyes carried the weight of what she had overheard. And in those eyes he saw fear, not for herself, but for her brother. Is it true? She asked softly. His breath left him like a slow exhale of smoke. Yes. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her expression trembled. She stepped back, needing space, trying to grasp the ground beneath her. Why didn't you tell us? Because it wasn't your burden to carry. Saren's voice cracked, almost a whisper. But it is now. She sat heavily on a bench near the hearth, staring at the fire. He loves you, she said after a moment. He looks up to you more than anyone in the world. He talks about how he wants to be just like you. even when you're stern, even when you don't smile. Tyrell's chest tightened. I never asked him to. You didn't have to, Saren said. He chose to. There was a long pause, heavy with smoke and silence. What will happen to him now? She asked, barely audible. Tyrell walked toward her slowly, every step deliberate, unsure. I don't know, he admitted. Will you send him away? He didn't answer. Saren's voice sharpened. You can't. He's my brother. Your blood or not, he's my brother. I know, Tyrell said. Then why are you acting like he's some threat? He sat down across from her, folding his hands. Because I don't know who I am when I'm not in control, he said, voice hoarse. And this, all of this, it was never part of the plan. Saren stared at him for a long time. Maybe the plan was wrong, she said softly. Her words cut deeper than accusation. They held no venom, only truth, and that made them unbearable. Tyrell looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were his, her fire his own. But she spoke like someone older, wiser, shaped by something outside the castle's walls. Promise me you won't hurt him, she said. He hesitated. Promise me. His throat tightened. I promise. She nodded, then stood. But before she left, she turned back. You should speak to Mother. She knows something she hasn't told you yet. The door clicked shut behind her, and Tyrell sat still for a long time, hands clenched tightly in his lap. Something she hasn't told me yet. The thought gnawed at him, more persistent than any whisper from the servants, more dangerous than the gossip spreading like wildfire. He went to Ellora's chambers that night, unannounced. She sat near the window, embroidering in the flickering candlelight, as if untouched by the chaos beneath their roof. But the moment she saw his face, she set the fabric aside. I know why you're here, she said. Then say it. She stood, walked slowly to the table, poured them each a glass of wine. He's coming, she said, placing the glass before Tyrell. Who? Lyren. His pulse faltered. You sent for him? No. He's coming because he wants to see his son. He sent a letter 2 days ago. I didn't tell you because I feared what you'd do. Tyrell's voice was cold. What I'd do? Ellora met his gaze, unflinching. You've built your entire life on control, Tyrell. But some truths can't be chained. Some things, like a child's heart, like the past, we can't command. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. You would let him walk into my castle? You would allow him to stand beneath my roof? He's not here to steal anything from you, she said gently. He only wants to look his son in the eyes. That son calls me father, and you will always be the one who raised him. But you and I both know blood is a wound that doesn't stop bleeding unless it's acknowledged. Tyrell stood, knocking the chair back. I should have had him killed when I first learned his name. But you didn't, she said quietly, because a part of you knew. Even then, a silence stretched between them. I will not let him take Kaelin from me, Tyrell said. No one is trying to take Kaelin, Ellora replied. You're the only one pushing him away. That night, Tyrell stood alone in the garden beneath the broken statue of Saint Mariel, the one who bore the sword of truth. Snow fell again. He looked up into the white sky, letting the flakes melt against his skin. He had promised his daughter he wouldn't hurt the boy, but Lyren was coming, and with him would come every buried truth Tyrell had spent a lifetime keeping sealed. And for the first time, he wasn't sure who he would become once those truths were unleashed. Tyrell hadn't slept. The storm inside him hadn't passed. It had only gone still, like the eye of a hurricane. He stood at the edge of the upper courtyard, looking down into the misty fields beyond the castle's gate. A lone rider was approaching, Lyren Erden. He hadn't imagined it would feel like this, like being pierced by a blade he couldn't see. From this distance, the man looked small, but his presence, it was enough to send a thrum of dread down Tyrell's spine. He turned without a word and descended the stone steps, his cloak whispering behind him like the breath of ghosts. In the great hall, Ellora stood waiting. She wore no jewels, no silk, just a simple dark gown that made her look almost like a widow. "You invited him inside," Tyrell said, voice flat. "I did," she replied. "He deserves that much." He walked toward her slowly. "Deserves? He deserves nothing. He deserves the truth," she said calmly. "And so does Kaylin." "Kaylin is mine," he hissed. "No," she said, stepping closer, her voice trembling but strong. "He's ours, yours and mine. And if you love him, truly, you won't keep him in the dark any longer." Tyrell's fists clenched. "Do not speak to me of love." "Why not?" she shot back, suddenly furious. "Because it frightens you? Because it doesn't bend to your will like everything else." He said nothing. The sound of hooves echoed through the front courtyard. The heavy doors creaked open moments later. And then he saw him. Lyran stepped into the great hall. His hair windblown, dark with streaks of gray. His clothes were plain, worn from travel. There were ink stains on his fingertips, and a pendant made of carved wood hung from his neck. He didn't look like a threat, but to Tyrell he was everything that could destroy him. Their eyes locked. Neither spoke. Not at first. Then Lyran bowed, not out of submission, but as one bows to another man whose life is in their hands. "Duke Lysberg," he said, his voice calm and even. "Thank you for allowing me to enter your home." Tyrell took a slow step forward. "You're bold, standing here." "I didn't come to fight you," Lyran replied. "Only to see him. Once." Tyrell's voice was a razor. "You mean my son?" Lyran held his gaze. "You raised him. I won't pretend that doesn't matter. But blood remembers. And so does the heart." Tyrell's jaw tensed. "Do you think I'll simply let you stroll through this castle and place your mark on him like a signature on a canvas?" "No," Lyran said. "But I came anyway." Silence. Thick, suffocating. It was Elora who broke it. "He deserves to look into the eyes of the man who gave him life." Tyrell turned to her, his voice cold. "And what about the man who gave him a name? Who taught him to hold a sword? Who watched over him when he fell ill? Is that worth nothing to you?" She stepped toward him, eyes glistening. "It's worth everything. But that's exactly why I'm asking you to be the one who tells him." His throat tightened. "You want me," he said, voice cracking, "to tell the boy I've loved that I am not his father?" Lyran said nothing. He stepped back, giving space to the man who had done what he never could. It was not his place to interfere now. Elora touched Tyrell's hand gently. "Let him hear it from you, not from whispers, not from servants, not from pain." Kaylin stood in the small chapel, lit by flickering candles. He had come here to pray, though he didn't know what for. His sword rested at the altar, a practice he had begun since he was 6. He said it was to remind himself that strength should bow to something greater. Tyrell entered quietly, watching him for a long moment. The boy turned when he heard footsteps and offered a soft smile. "Are we riding today?" Tyrell tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Kaylin frowned. "Father, I—" Tyrell stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "There's something I must tell you." The boy's smile faded. "What is it?" Tyrell's hands trembled. He hadn't felt fear like this in years. Not even on battlefields. Not when negotiating with kings. But this moment, it undid him. "I love you," he said first. "Before anything else. I need you to know that." Kaylin blinked, confused. I love you too." Tyrell took a breath, eyes fixed on the boy. His boy, even if not by blood. "There was a man, a long time ago, before your mother and I married." Kaylin didn't move. He was important to her. They shared something that never quite ended. The silence between them stretched like a chasm. "And I'm his?" Kaylin asked softly. Tyrell's eyes closed. "Yes." The boy looked down, hands shaking at his sides. The flicker of candles cast shadows across his face, but his tears gleamed like rivers in gold. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," Tyrell said. Afraid that if you knew, you'd stop seeing me as your father. Afraid you'd choose him. Kalen wiped his eyes, voice trembling. I didn't choose anyone. I didn't know there was a choice. Tyrell stepped closer. You don't have to choose. You are loved. By more than one man. That doesn't make you less. It makes you cherished. Kalen nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't lift. Is he here? Tyrell's heart seized. Yes. Kalen stood still for a long moment, then turned to face the door. His face was pale, his breath shallow. Can I meet him? Tyrell hesitated, then nodded once. The boy walked past him, head high, tears still falling, but with the dignity of someone who just crossed into a world that could never be unseen. Tyrell remained in the chapel, alone. He sat before the altar, beside the sword. He had feared the truth would destroy everything he had built. But as he sat in that silence, he began to wonder, had the lie already done worse? Kalen stood just beyond the archway. His steps were careful, measured, but his face was a storm barely held back by composure. Lyran was waiting. He stood at the far end of the gallery beneath a tapestry older than the kingdom itself, hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. His traveling cloak had been removed, revealing simple clothes beneath, earth-toned, threadbare at the sleeves. He looked nothing like a noble, nothing like the image Kalen had built of a father. And yet, there was something familiar in the slope of his shoulders, in the quiet patience in his eyes. Neither of them spoke at first. Lyran was the one who bowed his head, not in apology, but in reverence. I wasn't sure you would. Come. Kalen took a step closer. I almost didn't. His voice cracked just slightly, but he held it. I know this is not something a boy should be told at your age, Lyran said gently. But it was never meant to be hidden from you forever. Why now? Kalen asked, and though his voice was low, it trembled with the fury of a storm. Why now, when everything was fine? Lyran's eyes flickered. Was it? Kalen looked away. I had a name. I had a father. He paused, struggling. And then one day, I hear I'm not who I thought I was. And suddenly there's a stranger standing in my home, saying he's part of me. How am I supposed to just accept that? You don't have to accept anything today, Lyran said quietly. Or tomorrow. Or ever, if that's your choice. I came because I needed to see you. Not to take you. Not to claim you. Just to look at you. Kalen studied him. He searched for something that would make sense of the knot in his chest. But there was nothing familiar in this man. No memory. No scent. No warmth that felt like home. You left, Kalen said. Before I was born. You left her. You left me. Lyran closed his eyes for a moment. I didn't leave. I was cast out. By him. No, Lyran said, voice quiet. By the world she chose to protect you in. And I wasn't strong enough to fight it. Kalen stepped closer now, fists clenched. You let him raise me. Yes. You let me grow up thinking I belonged to someone who couldn't look at me without suspicion. Lyran flinched. That was the wound, and Kalen had struck it clean. I can't change the past, Lyran whispered. But I can offer you something now. The truth. Myself. Whatever pieces of me you want. Kalen turned sharply. He started pacing, his emotions bubbling beneath the surface. His whole body tensed like a bow drawn too tight. Do you even know what I like? What I'm afraid of? That I hate honey in my tea? Or that I only sleep with my back to the door because I don't trust what's behind me? Lyran swallowed hard. No, he admitted. Then why are you here? Kalen snapped, tears finally rising to his eyes. To clear your conscience? To paint yourself a noble picture of a man who tried. Lyran's voice broke. No, I'm here because I've spent every year since I left wondering what kind of man you'd become. And when your mother wrote me and said you might need to know, I came, not to fix anything, but because I couldn't live with myself if I let you believe no one else cared. Kalen's shoulders sank. His fists loosened. The pain on his face shifted. Not gone, just quieter. I don't know you, he said. Lyran nodded. But if you ever want to, I'm not far. Kalen stood still for a long moment. Then he asked, quietly, what was she like? Before she married him. Lyran smiled faintly, eyes softening with memory. She laughed louder. She used to sing when she thought no one could hear her. She painted wildflowers in the margins of my letters. And she dreamed about naming you after the stars. Kalen sat down slowly on the stone bench near the window. I only ever saw her in silk and silence, he whispered. She wore both like armor, Lyran replied. But before the castle, she was all fire and stubbornness. You have her temper. Kalen allowed a faint, bitter smile to twitch at his lips. They sat there in silence for a while. Not father and son. Not yet, but something beginning. In a corridor above the hall, Tyrell stood behind a heavy velvet curtain, watching through the gap with eyes that no longer burned with rage, but with something closer to grief. He'd known this would happen. He had allowed it, but still it hurt in places he didn't know he had. Not because Kalen had listened, but because Tyrell had seen something in the boy's face he'd never seen before. Relief, not joy, not forgiveness, just the soft, aching breath of someone who had carried a secret weight and had finally found where it came from. And Tyrell had not been the one to lift it. He turned before he was seen, walked quietly back toward his chamber, his steps slow. The pride that once carried him high now bent under a truth he could no longer bury. At the threshold of his room, he paused. Saren was sitting on the floor, sketching something in charcoal on parchment. She looked up and smiled gently. He met him. Tyrell nodded. Are you angry? No, she tilted her head. Are you sad? He didn't answer. She held out her sketch. It was a portrait. Not of Kalen, not of Lyran, but of all three of them. Standing beneath the arches of the castle, the mountains in the distance, their expressions uncertain but not broken. Tyrell stared at it, his throat tightening. He doesn't have to choose, she said softly. He looked at her. No, he murmured. But I do. She didn't ask what he meant, and he didn't say it out loud. But deep inside, Tyrell knew. The feast was coming. The nobles would gather. The future of his house would be on display. And he had a choice to make. One that would define not just the legacy of Lysburg, but the man he would finally become. The castle had transformed overnight. Tapestries were cleaned and hung anew. Candles placed in every corridor. Servants moved like shadows, polishing silver and refilling wine. Fires were lit in rooms long forgotten. Nobles from neighboring provinces had already begun arriving, draped in fur and pride, curious and hungry for spectacle. But beneath the ceremony, something darker pulsed, an unease, as if the stones themselves remembered too much. Tyrell stood before the tall, arched windows in his ceremonial chamber, dressed in his dark velvet robes, the ones lined with silver thread and stitched by his late mother's hand. He stared out over the arriving carriages, his reflection superimposed over the icy glass. He looked every inch the ruler, but inside something shifted. The memory of Kalen's face the night before haunted him. The way the boy had looked at Lyran, not with joy, not even with recognition, but with need. A need Tyrell had ignored for too long. He barely noticed the knock on his chamber door until it opened. It was Marvin, Lord Marvin, his advisor, his oldest political ally, and the only man in the court whose words still carried the weight of danger. "My lord," Marvin said, bowing. "The high tables are set. The Velden envoy has arrived. They expect a statement at dusk." Tyrell nodded slowly. "About the succession." Marvin raised an eyebrow. "Yes, they believe you intend to name your heir." Tyrell said nothing. Marvin stepped closer. "May I speak freely?" "You always do," Tyrell muttered. "The boy is not yours, Tyrell. And now it's no longer rumor. It's confession. The servants talk. The guests wonder. If you do not act, someone else will, on your behalf or against it." Tyrell's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm protecting you," Marvin replied. "And the realm." There was a long pause. Marvin walked to the hearth, warming his hands. You raised him. That counts for something. But the nobles, your council, they won't accept sentiment. They want blood, legacy, security. And if I say nothing? Tyrell asked. Then your silence becomes weakness. You'll be questioned, replaced, eventually even by your own. Tyrell turned back to the window. He's just a boy, he whispered. Marvin's voice sharpened. He's a threat. That word, threat, twisted in Tyrell's gut like a blade. The same boy who had placed wooden swords at his bedside when Tyrell was ill. The boy who practiced his archery just to impress him. The boy who stood straighter whenever Tyrell entered a room. Was he truly a threat? Or was Marvin right? Let me handle it, Marvin said, quietly, before the feast begins. We say he's taken ill. We send him to the countryside, permanently. The nobles will believe what we tell them. Tyrell's breath left him slowly, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, no, the word cut clean through the cold air. Marvin froze. Tyrell turned to face him, his voice low but immovable. No, he repeated. You will not touch him. Marvin's mouth opened, then closed. A flicker of shock passed through his eyes. Tyrell? He's my son, Tyrell said. Maybe not by blood, but he is mine. And if the court demands my strength, then let them see what real strength is. Marvin's voice hardened. Then name Saren your heir. At least she carries your line. Tyrell looked at him, and for the first time his gaze held something dangerous. I will name them both. Marvin's face paled. Both? That's madness. The council will riot. They will never accept it. Then they will learn to, Tyrell said. Or they'll find themselves standing outside my gates with frozen feet and no kingdom to inherit. You would risk a civil fracture for a boy who is not even... I would risk everything for him, Tyrell snapped. Because I already did. A silence fell between them. Marvin bowed his head slightly, calculating. As you wish, my lord. But Tyrell could see it. In the flicker of his eyes. The way his jaw clenched. The retreat wasn't real. Marvin was already planning something. Tyrell knew the look. He had worn it many times himself. When Marvin left, Tyrell sat alone at the edge of the hearth, his fists resting on his knees. He had made his decision, but decisions were not shields, they were fires, and this one would burn long into the night. Meanwhile, Kalen sat alone on the old steps of the West Garden, his ceremonial tunic untouched beside him. He held a small wooden carving in his hand, one Saren had made. Falcon, its wings outstretched. He turned it over again and again in his fingers. He didn't want to go to the feast. He didn't want to see his face on banners or hear his name spoken in toasts. He didn't want to wear a title he no longer believed in. His heart ached in a way words couldn't touch. It wasn't just the truth that hurt. It was the not knowing what it meant. Was he still a prince? Was he ever? Saren appeared behind him, her steps light. They're waiting for you. He didn't turn. Let them wait. She sat beside him, pulling her knees to her chest. They're going to name an heir tonight, she said. He nodded. Father told me he's choosing both of us. Kalen looked at her, surprised. What? She smiled softly. Not one or the other. Both. His throat tightened. That's not how it works. I think he's tired of how things work. He stared at her, then at the carving in his hand. I don't deserve it. You don't have to, she said gently. You just have to be brave enough to accept it. He turned his eyes back to the horizon. The first stars were beginning to emerge in the bruised sky, distant and cold. Do you think they'll accept me? Saren took his hand. I do. And in her voice, he heard the one thing he had needed all along. Not truth, not legacy, belief, but no one dared to speak too loudly. Not tonight. The nobles were arriving, their carriages rolling through the snow-packed gates of Lisburg with thunderous wheels and crests that glittered in the last breath of dusk. One by one, they entered, draped in furs, brocade, and suspicion. They greeted Tyrell with deep bows, with formal smiles that did not reach their eyes. Each knew why they were summoned. and each harbored their own expectations. Tyrell stood tall on the dais, dressed not in the silver-stitched velvet of old, but in black, plain, regal, somber, a color that did not dazzle but warned. Elora stood at his side, her gown dark emerald, her chin lifted in defiance of every whisper that had surrounded her since the rumors began. And behind them, the twins, Saren in a soft blue dress, her curls pinned with moonstones, calm, still, eyes wide as if holding the weight of the world and balancing it like a glass ball. And Kalen, dressed not as a prince, but as himself. No crest, no medals, just a dark tunic, his jaw set, his hands clenched at his sides. The hall grew quiet as Tyrell stepped forward. He did not raise a goblet. He did not welcome them with flowery speeches. He simply said, "You came for answers." A murmur rippled through the crowd, uneasy. "You've heard the rumors," he continued. "You've shared them. Some of you whispered them in dark corridors. Others have already decided what they believe. So let me spare you the effort of pretending any longer." He looked out at the crowd, at the men and women who had once cheered him, feared him, needed him. 5 years ago, I held a child in my arms and named him my heir. I taught him to wield a sword, to speak with honor, to lead with strength. That boy was not born of my blood, but he was born of my house. Gasps erupted, scattered and sharp. The murmurs turned into a wave. Some nobles exchanged horrified glances. Others looked to Marvin, who stood at the far end of the room, jaw clenched, unmoving. Tyrell raised his hand, and silence fell once more. "You may think this weak. You may believe it makes my line impure. But I ask you, what makes a ruler? Is it blood alone? Or is it the choice to carry something forward, even when it was never yours to begin with?" Kalen's eyes glistened. He didn't move, but he breathed deeper. Tyrell's voice softened, but did not falter. "I raised him as my son, and tonight I name him as such, not because of blood, but because of loyalty, of love, of choice." He turned slightly. "And I name my daughter Saren, rightful heir by blood, equal in title and equal in legacy. Both will carry Lysburg into the next age. Together." The silence was total. A noblewoman dropped her goblet. No one picked it up. Then laughter. Slow, sharp. Marvin stepped forward from the crowd, clapping once, then again. "Well done," he said, voice laced with venom. "A speech fit for a playwright. But the realm does not run on poetry, Tyrell. It runs on order." Tyrell watched him, unmoving. "Your enemies will seize this," Marvin continued. "They will say you've gone soft, that you're ruled by sentiment, by shame, by the whims of a woman and a bastard." The word rang through the hall like a slap. Kalen's head dropped, shame crawling up his neck like fire. But Tyrell stepped forward, voice steady as steel. "Say it again." Marvin blinked. "What?" I said, "Say it again." Marvin smirked. "Bast?" Tyrell struck. A single step, a single blow. His fist cracked across Marvin's jaw, sending the older man stumbling back into a table with a crash. Goblets shattered. Nobles gasped. Guards reached for their hilts, then hesitated. Tyrell stood over Marvin, his voice now a low growl. "You will never speak of him that way again." Blood trickled from the corner of Marvin's mouth, but his eyes were wide, not with pain but disbelief. "You just sealed your own ruin," he whispered. "Then let it come," Tyrell said. "But know this. If the realm burns, it won't be because I lied. It'll be because I finally told the truth." He turned away, and no one dared stop him. He walked to Kalen and placed a hand on his shoulder. The boy looked up at him, his chest rising with every breath, tears quietly streaking down his cheeks. "You meant it," Kalen whispered. "All of it." Tyrell nodded. "Every word." Saren stepped forward and took Kalen's other hand. And in the eyes of the court, who once saw a legacy of silver and steel, stood something more dangerous. A family made of truth, and love, and choice. In the shadows, Marvin wiped the blood from his chin and smiled to himself. Not because he'd won. The castle breathed differently now. Even the walls seemed to listen. It was past midnight when Tyrell walked alone through the corridor that led to the eastern wing. The lanterns along the stone walls burned low, casting thin lines of light across his path. His steps were slow, his fingers grazing the cool stone, as though he needed to feel something solid, something unchanging. But nothing felt solid anymore. He had made his choice, not out of strategy, not for politics, but from something deeper. And now that it was done, the aftershock rippled through him like cold water beneath the skin. When he reached Kaelin's chamber, he stood for a moment outside the door, his hand poised to knock. But something stopped him. A voice, soft, raw. Inside, Kaelin was speaking to someone. "No, it's not that I didn't believe him," the boy whispered. "It's just, I waited so long for him to see me, to really see me, and when he finally did, I didn't know how to hold it." There was a pause. Then Saren's voice, quiet and calm. "You don't have to hold it. You just have to let it in." Tyrell's hand dropped to his side. He didn't knock. He turned and left. He walked back through the corridor, deeper into the castle, not toward his chamber but toward the tower. The old tower, the one that hadn't been used in years. It was where the archives were stored, and where Vareth, the alchemist, had kept his quarters. The door creaked as he entered. Dust clung to everything. Scrolls and dried herbs lined the shelves, and glass vials caught the lantern light with glimmers of green and blue. But Tyrell wasn't here for old knowledge. He was here for answers. At the far end of the room, an iron chest sat beneath a tapestry. Locked. He retrieved the key from around his neck. The lid creaked open. Inside were documents, sealed letters, testaments, reports. And at the very top, wrapped in black ribbon, the alchemist's original findings. Tyrell sat heavily at the desk and unrolled the scroll. He read it again, slowly, as if the ink might say something different now. But it didn't. Subject: Kaelin. Parentage determined. Maternal match confirmed. Paternal match, no genetic match with Duke Tyrell Lisburg. He closed his eyes. Let the words sink deeper, pierce deeper. But something caught his attention as he went to roll the scroll. A corner folded beneath another page. There was more. Another line, faint, as if added later. However, trace genetic markers show partial correlation. Retesting advised. Possible relation via second. Paternal line. Tyrell's breath stopped. His eyes scanned the note again. Faster this time. Partial correlation. Not none. He reached for another parchment. One that bore Lyran's full name, birthplace, and family history. A record Elora had once shared with the scribes to silence the court's judgment. His finger slid down to the name beneath Lyran's. Thurin Lisburg, Tyrell's uncle. Disgraced. Disinherited. Banished from court over 2 decades ago for theft, sedition, and political scandal. The last known whereabouts? A traveling guild in the Free Provinces. The same one Lyran had joined. Tyrell's chest tightened. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible." But it was. It meant Kaelin may still carry Lisburg blood, not from Tyrell, but from the same line. He stood abruptly, scrolls scattering across the desk. His heart thundered, not with joy, not with relief, with rage, because someone had known, someone had hidden this. He stormed through the castle like a shadow in motion. Servants bowed, guards stepped aside, and his fury carried him down into the lower levels, where Marvin kept his private quarters. The door was locked. Tyrell didn't knock. He kicked it open. Marvin was there, half-dressed, startled from sleep, his hand flying to the dagger at his bedside. Tyrell grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "You knew," he hissed. Marvin's breath caught. "What? You knew the boy was related to me. You knew and still tried to turn me against him." Marvin's expression shifted, flickering between denial and calculation. "The truth was uncertain," he said quickly. "We didn't want to complicate." "We," Tyrell growled. "Who is we?" Marvin said nothing. Tyrell shoved him harder. "You manipulated the results. You made me believe he was nothing." "Why?" Marvin's voice broke. Because you were weak. You hesitated. You started looking at him like a son long before you knew the truth, and I couldn't let that cloud your rule. You needed clarity, and I gave it to you." Tyrell's hands trembled. "You gave me doubt," he whispered. "You let me carry it like a curse." Marvin laughed bitterly. "And look what it made you do. You claimed him anyway, even when you thought he was no one. That makes you stronger than I ever imagined." Tyrell's eyes burned. Then he let go. Marvin slid to the floor, coughing, disheveled. Tyrell stepped back. "Gather your things," he said, voice low. "You're leaving the castle tonight." "You're banishing me?" Marvin spat, wiping blood from his lip. "No," Tyrell replied. "I'm giving you a head start, because if you stay past dawn, I won't banish you." Marvin's face paled. Tyrell turned and walked away. He didn't need a sword. He didn't need blood. He had reclaimed something far more dangerous than vengeance. He had reclaimed the truth, and now he would make sure his son never had to question it again. He stood at the edge of the battlement, the wind tugging at his cloak. He hadn't slept, couldn't. His mind reeled with the revelation. Kalen carried Lisburg blood after all. Not his son, no, but his blood, his family. All this time he'd been fighting ghosts. He gripped the stone ledge until his knuckles turned white. A voice interrupted his thoughts, quiet but firm behind him. "You sent Marvin away." Tyrell didn't turn. "You heard." "I see everything," Elora said, stepping into the wind, her cloak billowing. "Especially when it concerns our children." Tyrell finally turned to face her. Her face was pale, her eyes full of storms barely concealed. "You knew about the Ren." Her lips parted, but she said nothing at first. He stepped closer. "You knew, Elora? You knew Kalen had Lisburg blood." "I suspected," she said. "I wasn't certain until after Veritha's test. The name Erden, it wasn't real. It was a borrowed name. Lyran told me only after Kalen was born, after it was too late to change anything." Tyrell's breath came fast. "And you didn't tell me." "I didn't want you to accept him out of duty," she said, voice shaking. "Or obligation. I wanted you to see him, to love him for who he was, not for what blood he carried." He laughed bitterly, the sound raw and hollow. "So you let me suffer in silence? Let him suffer? Let me believe I was raising the child of a stranger." "You were," she whispered. "But he wasn't a stranger to your soul." He stared at her, and in her eyes he saw it. Not cruelty, not malice. Faith. It was faith that had held her tongue, that had allowed her to let him find the answer on his own. And it infuriated him, and it broke him. "You gambled with my legacy," he said. "I gambled with your heart," she replied. "And for once you chose it." The words hit him like a blade, because they were true. Tyrell lowered his gaze to the distant stables, where Kalen was preparing his horse. The boy rose early now, trained longer, spoke less. Since the night of the feast, something in him had shifted. Not in rebellion, but in resolve. "He's going to ride today," Tyrell murmured. "To the old borderlands." "Yes," Elora said. "He asked for your blessing. I didn't give it. You didn't need to." He turned to her sharply. "You think he's ready?" "I think he's already carrying more than you ever did at his age," she said. "He's not going to prove anything. He's going to breathe." The wind whipped around them. "Did you love him?" Tyrell asked suddenly. She didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "I did," she said. "And me." Her eyes softened. "You broke my heart the day you told me I was chosen for strength, not for love," she said. "And you healed it the night you claimed both our children as your own." He looked away. "I don't know how to be that man all the time." "You don't need to," she said. "Just don't stop trying." A pause. Then she placed a hand on his arm, something rare, something almost forgotten. "Tell him," she whispered. "About the run. About the blood. Tell him what you found." Tyrell swallowed hard. "I don't want him to think I changed my mind. Because of lineage." Elora looked at him with gentle fierceness. "Then make sure he knows you didn't." Kalen tightened the straps on his saddle. his breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. The courtyard was empty save for the stable master and one guard who watched from a respectful distance. His fingers were numb, but his mind was clear. This wasn't escape. It wasn't defiance. It was distance, a space to breathe, to find who he was between the truth and the title. Footsteps behind him. He didn't turn. Not right away. Then he heard his name. Kalen. He turned. Tyrell stood there, dressed in his riding cloak, but with no horse, no guards, just him. "I thought you wouldn't come," Kalen said quietly. "I almost didn't," Tyrell replied. The boy looked down, adjusting the leather strap again, though it didn't need adjusting. "You're not angry?" "I've been many things," Tyrell said. "Angry, afraid, proud, but not of you, never at you." Kalen finally looked at him, and the weight behind those eyes was different now. No longer the need to be accepted, but the fear of being let go. "I found something," Tyrell said, "in the alchemist's notes. Something I didn't know before." Kalen said nothing, just waited. "You are my blood, through my uncle, my family's disgrace. You carry the Lisberg line." Kalen blinked. I don't understand." "You don't have to," Tyrell said, "because I chose you long before I knew. But I need you to know this: your name, your place was never a lie. Not in this house. Not in my heart." Kalen looked away fast, blinking hard. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his tunic. "I didn't need to be your blood to be your son," he said. "I know," Tyrell replied, voice thick. "I just needed you to say it. I'm saying it now." Kalen nodded. A slow, fragile smile began to spread across his face. "I'll only be gone 2 days." Tyrell stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll be waiting when you return," he said. "As your father." And for the first time since the truth had torn them apart, Kalen believed it. He didn't know exactly what he was seeking, only that he needed to feel small for a moment. Small enough to hear the truth inside him without all the voices around him weighing it down. The sky darkened early that day. Clouds bruised and thick rolled in from the east, and the cold shifted. Not just winter chill, but something else. Wrong. The kind of stillness that animals sense before a storm or an ambush. The trees no longer swayed. The wind no longer spoke. He slowed his horse and listened. Nothing, until a whistle. Sharp, precise, not natural. He turned in the saddle. Too late. A figure emerged from behind a boulder. Cloaked, fast, and silent. Kalen reached for his blade, but a second shadow swept in from behind, knocking him clean from his horse. He hit the ground hard, his breath ripped from his lungs. Boots crunched in the snow. He tried to rise, but a knee pressed down on his back, and a gloved hand wrenched his arm behind him. "Careful," a voice snapped. "He's the heir. They'll want him breathing." Another figure leaned down, pulling back his hood. A narrow face, weather-worn and sharp, eyes cold and calculating. The man studied Kalen for a long moment before speaking. "He doesn't look like much," he said, "but blood's blood." Kalen struggled, breathless. What do you want?" The man smiled. "Justice." Tyrell slammed his fist on the map table so hard that one of the carved wooden markers toppled. Snow was still clinging to his boots from where he'd ridden back into the castle, but he hadn't stopped. Not to change, not to think. "They were waiting," he growled. "Someone knew his route. Someone gave it to them." Saren sat on the bench near the fire, her hands trembling around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Elora stood in the doorway, pale but composed. "It wasn't bandits," she said. "They took only him. They left his horse, his coin, even his blade." Tyrell paced the war room like a caged beast. "Then it's political." "Marvin," Saren said, her voice soft but shaking. Elora's gaze snapped to her. "He was exiled." Tyrell turned. "He wasn't. I gave him a head start. I let him walk instead of bleed. That was my mistake." A knock at the door. The guard entered, bowed. "A messenger, my lord, from the old watchtower in the east." Tyrell took the letter with hands that shook despite himself. The seal was unknown. No sigil. Just black wax. He broke it. The note was brief. He carries your blood, but not your name. Perhaps it's time the kingdom remembers which of the two truly matters. If you want him returned alive, bring the girl. Tyrell's fingers crushed the parchment in his fist. They want Saren. Elora moved forward. No, Tyrell shook his head. They're not after her title. They're after what she represents. If they remove her, Kaelin inherits alone. Which means chaos, war, contested claims. They want Lysburg shattered. Saren stood. Her voice was quiet. Then let me go. Tyrell turned sharply. Absolutely not. I'm not a child, she said. And if they think I'm the answer to breaking this house, then let them see I'm not afraid of them. Tyrell stepped toward her, voice like thunder. I will not trade one of my children for the other. Then what will you do? She challenged, eyes burning. Wait until they kill him to make a statement? The room stilled. Elora broke the silence. We need to know who's backing them. This kind of move, it's not made by outlaws. It's made by those with coin and cause. Tyrell nodded, his voice steel. I'll ride to the watchtower myself, with a message of my own. Saren touched his arm. You shouldn't go alone. I won't, he said. I'll take 6 men. No banners. No armor. No crown. Let them think they've won. Let them believe I'm weak enough to negotiate. He met her eyes. And when I find them, he looked to Elora. I end this. Kaelin was tied to a post inside a crumbling ruin that once served as a border outpost. The stone walls wept with moisture, the wind howling through the cracks like mourners. His hands were raw from the rope. His lips split, but his eyes were clear. One of the captors threw a bucket of water across the floor near him. Not thirsty, Prince? Kaelin didn't answer. The man laughed. Your silence won't save you, and it won't save her either. She won't come, Kaelin said hoarsely. Oh, she will. The man grinned. That's the thing about nobles. They love their pride, but they love their children more. Kaelin breathed slowly, grounding himself, not with anger, but memory. He remembered the way Tyrell had looked at him before he left. I'll be waiting when you return. He closed his eyes. Please wait, just a little longer. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The only thing that burned inside him now was purpose. Every step closer to the watchtower twisted something deeper in his chest. A storm of fury and guilt. He should have ridden with Kaelin. Not after the truth. Not after the feast. Before. When the boy still looked at him like a god. Now he just prayed he'd get the chance to see that look one more time. When the ruins came into view through the snow, Tyrell raised his hand. The guards stopped, dismounted silently, and waited in the tree line. He went forward alone, cloak billowing behind him, no blade drawn, no shield, just his name, just his wrath. Inside the half-fallen tower, torches flickered against damp stone. The air smelled of mold, sweat, and smoke. Kaelin was tied to a central beam, arms behind him, his tunic torn, blood crusted on his brow. Tyrell saw red, but he didn't run. He walked, measured, controlled, deadly. A figure stepped from the shadows. Lean, pale, with gray eyes that flickered like oil atop water. The man smiled. You came. I said I would, Tyrell replied. The captor circled Kaelin slowly, never taking his eyes off the Duke. He's brave. I'll give him that. Didn't scream once. Not even when we broke his shoulder. Tyrell's fists clenched. The man laughed softly. Ah, so there is still a beast behind all that silk and silver. What do you want? Tyrell said, voice low, carved from ice. Nothing, the man replied. Or nothing now. We were hoping you'd bring the girl, Saren. Trade her for the boy. But that message came too late, didn't it? You planned this for chaos, Tyrell said. You don't care about heirs. Or names. The man shrugged. No, not really. I care about crumbling thrones. About showing people their gods bleed. He stepped closer to Kalen and drew a thin dagger from his belt. Should I remind him what that sounds like? Tyrell didn't move. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You touch him again, and you die before you take your next breath. The captor tilted his head. And what will you trade for him now, Duke? No daughter, no gold, no crown to give up. I'll trade me, Tyrell said. Kalen's head snapped up. No. Tyrell didn't look at him. The captor laughed, surprised. You'd give yourself for the boy. I would. Why? Tyrell's jaw tightened. Because he's mine. The captor grinned. But he isn't. That's the point. That's why this is so fun. Tyrell took a slow step forward. He is mine because I made him mine, because I chose him, because I raised him, and because I will not let men like you teach him what a father is. The captor's grin faded slightly. Outside, the wind howled louder and faintly. There was movement in the woods. The guards were in place. The captor looked at Tyrell for a long, drawn breath, then turned the dagger in his hand and pressed it lightly to Kalen's throat. I suppose then, he said softly, we'll see how deep your love goes. Tyrell didn't blink. Do it, he said. Kalen's eyes widened. The captor hesitated. I said do it, Tyrell roared. Because the second you do, my men will fall upon this place like fire from the heavens, and I will make sure you die screaming. So go on. Make your point. The dagger twitched, then lowered. Not as stupid as you look, the captor muttered. He turned toward Tyrell, and that was when the arrow took him clean through the throat. He staggered, blood spraying the stone, and fell to his knees, eyes bulging in shock. Another man from the shadows shouted. A sword was drawn, but 3 more arrows came in quick succession. One guard from Tyrell's company stormed the chamber, blade swinging clean, and it was over in seconds. Tyrell was already at Kalen's side, slicing the ropes with shaking hands. Are you hurt? Kalen was breathing hard, his skin ghost pale, one shoulder twisted at a wrong angle, but his voice was steady. You offered yourself for me. Tyrell looked at him, truly looked. I would do it again. Kalen blinked. A single tear slipped down his bruised cheek. Why? Tyrell's voice broke. Because I spent too many years thinking blood made family. Doesn't. You do. And I was a fool to ever make you question that. Kalen's jaw trembled. You didn't have to come. Yes, Tyrell whispered. I did. And I always will. The boy nodded, slow, exhausted. Good, he said faintly. Because I wasn't ready to leave. Tyrell smiled. Painful, broken, relieved. Then let's go home. He pulled Kalen to his feet, wrapping his arm around him, holding him like he should have done years ago. And in the ruins of a place meant to break them, father and son walked out together, unbroken. Tyrell's arms around him were steady, protective. Arms that once felt like stone now felt like armor. Neither spoke for miles. There were no words yet for what they had just endured, for what had changed. Only silence, and the rhythm of the horses' hooves in the snow. It wasn't until they passed the river crossing that Kalen finally whispered, Did you kill him? Tyrell's jaw tightened. No, I didn't have to. My men did what needed to be done. Kalen's eyes closed. Good. Pause. Then, I wanted to kill him, for hurting me. I know. Tyrell looked down at him. But I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you didn't lose that part of yourself. I thought I already had, Kalen said quietly. In that room, tied up like an animal. I was so angry. I didn't feel like myself anymore. Tyrell guided the horse to a slower trot. You were terrified. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you human. But I didn't want to be afraid. I didn't either, Tyrell said. When I saw you there, bleeding, bound, I've gone to war without shaking. I faced kings without fear. But in that moment, Kalen, his voice cracked. I was terrified. They rode in silence for another stretch, the wind biting at their faces. Then Kalen said, You came. It wasn't a statement. It was a prayer answered. I did, Tyrell whispered. Kalen shifted slightly, the pain forcing a small gasp from his lips. Tyrell tightened his hold instinctively, and the boy didn't resist. "I didn't think you would," he said. "I almost didn't," Tyrell admitted. "For a long time, I let my pride speak louder than my heart." Kalen tilted his head back just enough to glance up. "And now I only listen to one thing." "What's that?" "You," Tyrell said, "and Saren, and your mother, and everything I nearly lost because I was too blind to see what matters." Kalen's eyes burned. He didn't say anything else. He just rested his head again, and Tyrell held him closer. The gates of Lisburg opened just before dawn. Guards stood in stunned silence as the Duke rode in. Not with a banner behind him, not flanked by a grand procession, but carrying his wounded son in his arms like a sacred treasure. Elora stood waiting. She ran the moment she saw them. "Kalen!" Her voice cracked with panic as she rushed to meet them, her hands outstretched. "I'm fine," Kalen murmured as Tyrell gently lowered him down. "Just broken in places I didn't know I had." Elora cupped his face, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Look at you," she breathed, kissing his forehead. "My boy, my brave, foolish, stubborn boy." Saren came running from the side hall, throwing herself at them both, wrapping her arms around Kalen's waist, careful not to touch his shoulder. "You're alive," she sobbed. "I was so scared." "I'm here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You kept your promise. You believed in me. I always will." Tyrell stepped back, letting them hold each other. He watched quietly, something soft and deep blooming in his chest. Then Elora turned to him. Their eyes met, and she saw it, the change. Not in his posture, not in his robes or expression, but in his eyes, in the way he looked at Kalen. He stepped toward her, his voice low. "He's more than I deserved." "No," she said, taking his hand. "He's exactly what we created, together." The castle physician set Kalen's shoulder while the rest of the family waited outside the chamber. Saren sat curled in a window seat, her face drawn with exhaustion but too alert to sleep. Elora paced slowly, arms crossed. Tyrell leaned against the wall, silent. Then the door opened. The physician bowed slightly. "He's sleeping now. The bone will heal, but he'll need time. And patience." "We'll give him both," Elora said. When the doctor left, Tyrell didn't follow the others inside right away. He lingered at the threshold. He could see Kalen through the doorway, bandaged, pale, but breathing evenly. The boy's hand rested on the edge of the blanket, his fingers twitching in sleep, like he was reaching for something even now. Tyrell stepped in, pulled a chair close, and sat. He stared for a long time. Then he leaned forward and spoke softly. "When you were little, you used to sneak into the war room and move the wooden soldiers on the battle maps. I used to be furious. I thought it was defiance. But it wasn't. It was curiosity." He let out a shaky breath. "You've always seen the world differently, and I tried to shape you into something you never were, because I was afraid of what you might become if I didn't control it." His voice dropped. "I was wrong." He reached forward and gently brushed a strand of hair from Kalen's brow. "You are stronger than me, Kalen. Kinder, wiser. I see that now." Kalen stirred slightly, but did not wake. "I don't know what the future holds," Tyrell continued, "but whatever comes, whatever you decide to be, you won't face it alone." He sat there until the candles burned low, until sleep claimed them both. And outside the window, the storm that had haunted them for so long finally began to break. Something lingered. There were too many unanswered questions, and the attack on Kalen had not been random. It had been orchestrated, timed, positioned, executed by professionals, not bandits. And the letter had been signed by no one, sealed by no house. It meant someone powerful was hiding behind shadows. He sat alone in the solar, the morning light slanting across the table, parchment spread before him. A dozen names circled. Nobles, rivals, old alliances he thought long buried. He had fought wars, made peace with enemies. But this was different. It was personal. The door creaked open behind him. Tyrell didn't look up. "I said I wasn't to be disturbed." "It's not a disturbance," Saren's voice said gently. He turned. She stood there in a soft gown the color of dawn, her eyes bright with something quiet and knowing. She walked slowly toward the table, gazing down at the names he'd marked. "They're afraid of him, aren't they?" Tyrell nodded. "They're afraid of both of you, because we don't fit their idea of a legacy." He looked at her. "No, because you survived their idea of it." She touched the edge of the parchment. Her fingers paused over one name, then another. "This one," she said. "Lord Belvane. He visited after the feast. His son asked about Kaelin's training, about your estate in the east." "I remember," Tyrell muttered. He was the only one who didn't ask how Kaelin was after the news broke. Tyrell's eyes narrowed. "You think he's behind it?" "I think he has something to gain." Tyrell sat back in his chair, watching her. "You've grown sharp," he said. She looked up at him with a faint smile. "You taught me to pay attention." There was a pause. Then she sat beside him. "Father," she said slowly, "there's something else." His breath caught. "What?" She hesitated, then pulled from her sleeve a folded letter, edges worn. "I found this among Kaelin's belongings. He doesn't know I saw it." Tyrell unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name at the bottom stopped his breath. Lyran. The words were few, not dramatic, but every one carved into Tyrell's skin like a blade. "If you ever wish to know why you were born, why they've hidden it, follow the crest of the twin lions. You deserve more than silence." Tyrell stared at the ink, a slow fire crawling into his veins. "He wrote to Kaelin." Saren nodded. "I don't know when. I don't know why Kaelin didn't tell us." Tyrell stood abruptly, pacing toward the window, fists clenched. "He's stirring things again, feeding the idea that we're hiding more from him." "Are we?" Saren asked softly. Tyrell turned. His eyes burned. "I've given him everything. My name, my title, my love." "I know," she said. "But to him, the pieces are still scattered. And now, someone's offered him a map." Tyrell turned back to the window. The twin lions, the sigil of House Arenth. An old banner, faded, forgotten, exiled decades ago after a failed rebellion in the Southern Isles. It was a name buried in history, and yet Lyran had written it, not randomly, but with purpose. Kaelin entered the chamber without knocking. He moved slower now, one arm still bound in cloth, his face thinner from pain, but his eyes had changed, hardened, older. "I know what the letter says," he said, voice steady. Tyrell turned, surprised. Kaelin stepped forward, pulled a chair, and sat across from him. "I wasn't going to tell you," he said. "Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want you to look at me like I was searching for another father." Tyrell said nothing. Kaelin continued. "But after the ruins, after what you did, I realized I've been searching for the wrong thing." Tyrell's voice was rough. "Then why keep the letter?" "Because I need to know why they're after me. Why someone thought I was worth killing. Why there's still a trail leading back to people I've never met." Tyrell slowly sat down, staring at him. "There are parts of your history that even I haven't uncovered," he admitted. "But I promise you this, Kaelin. If you want answers, I'll find them with you." Kaelin blinked. "You mean that?" "I do." Kaelin leaned forward. "Then we start with the twin lions." A silence stretched between them, no longer weighted, but brimming. Tyrell looked to Saren, who stood quietly at the corner of the room, watching her brother with pride. Then back to Kaelin. "If we follow this," Tyrell said, "we make enemies." "I already have enemies," Kaelin replied. "What I want now are truths." Tyrell reached out and gripped his son's uninjured hand. "Then that's what you'll have." Outside the window, the first blossoms of spring curled open along the frost-kissed vines of the western wall. But inside the castle, something else bloomed. A family, reforged in fire and blood, now bound by purpose. Tyrell traced the path with a gloved finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. Beside him, Kalen leaned on the table, his injured arm still bound, his other hand gripping the map's edge. Saren stood near the hearth, arms crossed, her eyes flicking between her father and brother with quiet intensity. "They were exiled before you were born," Tyrell said. "House Aranth led the rebellion from the Southern Isles. Their banner bore the twin lions. I thought they were crushed." Kalen's voice was low. "Maybe they weren't. Lyran knew something," Saren murmured. "That's why he wrote to you." Kalen nodded, his eyes never leaving the map. "He said I was born of silence, that truth had been buried. Maybe he wasn't just talking about the bloodlines. Maybe it's more than that." Tyrell straightened, his jaw tightening. "If the Aranth remnants survived in hiding, and if they believe you're a threat to the old regime they want to restore, then the attack wasn't just a message," Kalen finished. "It was the beginning." There was a pause. Then Tyrell turned to his daughter. "Saren, I want you and your mother to leave the castle. Tonight, go to Black Hill. Take the guards." "No," Saren said instantly. "Saren?" "No," she stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You don't get to protect us by pushing us away again. Not this time. If someone's trying to divide us, they'll expect you to scatter the family. That's what they want. We stay together." Kalen looked at her, his heart tightening with gratitude. Tyrell stared for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Together, then," he said. A knock at the door. Tyrell turned. "Enter." A guard stepped inside, breathless. "A rider has arrived, my lord. He bears no banner, but he carries a white flag. He says he brings a message from the Lions of the South." Tyrell's blood turned cold. "Where is he?" "In the lower courtyard." "I want him alive," Tyrell ordered. "Bring him here." The guard bowed and left. Minutes later, the door reopened. 2 soldiers entered, flanking a man whose cloak dripped with melted snow. He was younger than expected, mid-20s perhaps, with dark curls falling over a weather-worn face. He walked with a limp and carried no weapons, only a scroll. He bowed low before Tyrell. "My name is Aiden. I speak for those your house thought extinct." Kalen stepped forward. "Then speak." Aiden looked at him. He tilted his head, as if studying a long-lost painting. "You are not what we expected," he said softly. "Good," Kalen replied. "Now say what you came to say." Aiden pulled the scroll from his cloak and offered it to Tyrell. "Our house fell because of lies, because of a crown that feared change. We did not die. We adapted. And now we rise again." Tyrell unrolled the scroll. It was written in old script, elegant, purposeful. He read aloud, "We do not seek your throne. We seek truth. You've raised one of our blood as your own. He belongs to both worlds now. But soon he must choose." Kalen's breath caught. "Choose?" Aiden nodded slowly. "The blood in your veins ties you to us. We offer you a place among us, not as a traitor to Lisburg, but as a bridge between kingdoms. You could unite what was broken. Or you could stay here and let the storm come." Tyrell stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You come with veiled threats and call it diplomacy. You offer him poison in a goblet and call it a crown." Aiden met his eyes. "I come with a door, Duke. You may call it what you like, but it is opening." "Why now?" Saren asked. "Why not 10 years ago?" Aiden's eyes flicked to her. "Because the prophecy marked his coming of age. When the blood of Aranth crossed into adulthood under a foreign name. It is said the lions will roar again when the crown is divided." Tyrell looked at Kalen, the weight of it crashing down like thunder. "You believe in this prophecy?" he asked Aiden. "I believe in history, and in the fire I've seen in the boy's eyes. Your fire, our blood." Kalen said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Why me?" "Because you don't belong to one world anymore," Aiden replied. "And only someone like that can create a new one." Tyrell's fists clenched. "Leave, now, before I forget the law of hospitality." Aiden bowed. "He has until the next moon to decide. If he does not come to us willingly, the offer dies." and so will the peace that stands between us." As he turned to go, he paused. "But know this, if he chooses us, it will not be as a son, but as a king." The door shut behind him. Silence fell. Kalen lowered himself into a chair, his chest rising and falling. "I don't want to be king of a broken cause," he said. "You're not," Tyrell said. "You're my son. But I carry their blood," he whispered. "And their war just knocked on our door." Tyrell knelt in front of him, taking Kalen's hand. "Then we'll fight it, together, but not by becoming them, not by surrendering to ghosts." Saren stepped forward, wrapping her arms around both of them. "I don't care what prophecy says," she said. "He already made his choice. He chose us." Kalen looked at them, and for the first time, with every truth finally laid bare, Kalen stood at the edge of the inner garden, his cloak wrapped tightly around him, staring at the old statue of the first Duke Lisberg. The marble had begun to crack from years of frost and sun, the once proud face now softened by moss and time. The sword in its hands pointed downward, not in defeat, but in peace. He touched the stone gently. "Did you ever wonder if you were making the right choices?" he whispered. "Every day," said a voice behind him. Kalen turned. Elora stood beneath the ivy-covered archway, her hands clasped in front of her, a softness in her gaze that cut deeper than scolding ever could. He bowed his head. "I didn't mean to wake anyone." "You didn't," she said, stepping closer. "I haven't slept. None of us have." Kalen looked back at the statue. "I thought peace would come after the truth, but it hasn't. It just made everything louder." Elora nodded. "Truth isn't quiet, Kalen. It rarely comforts. It rattles what we thought we understood." There was a long pause. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "They say I could unite two worlds, but I've barely learned to live in one." She stepped beside him, brushing her fingers over the moss. "Do you remember," she said softly, "when you were 7 and you got lost in the western woods?" He blinked. "I was missing for hours. I was terrified," she said, a small smile ghosting her lips. "But when we found you, you weren't crying. You were sitting by the river, talking to the water like it was your friend." "I was pretending I was a knight," he said. "I was waiting for someone to come rescue me. And when we asked you what you wanted most in the world," Elora continued, "you said, 'I want to be brave enough to wait.'" Kalen looked at her, startled. "I don't remember saying that." "But I do," she said, "because it broke me a little. You weren't waiting for someone to save you, Kalen. You were waiting to become someone who didn't need saving." His throat tightened. "I don't know if I'm that person." She turned to him, placing a hand on his chest. "You already are." The moment held. Then Tyrell's voice echoed from behind them. "We have a visitor." They both turned. Tyrell's expression was unreadable, but there was tension in the set of his shoulders. He motioned for them to follow. In the lower chamber, past the cold stone hallway rarely used except for private councils, Lyran stood. He had come without escort, without title or demand, just a weather-worn cloak, leather boots stained with old travel, and eyes that flickered with pain and purpose alike. Kalen froze in the doorway. Lyran turned. For a moment, too long, neither spoke. Then, "I wasn't sure you'd see me," Lyran said. Kalen's voice was quiet. "I wasn't sure I wanted to." Tyrell stood like a sentinel at the wall, unmoving. Elora placed a hand lightly on his arm and stepped back, giving them space. Kalen entered slowly, the air around him thick with memory. "You sent the letter," he said. "Yes," Lyran replied. "You told me to follow the twin lions, because I wanted you to see what they were trying to keep from you." Tyrell's voice was sharp. "Who is they, exactly? And why stir a kingdom that has only just begun to heal?" Lyran turned toward him, calm. "Because he deserves to know the war didn't start with him. It started with me." Kalen narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Lyran looked at him, really looked, and something in his expression shifted, gentleness swallowed by guilt. "I was not exiled just for being your mother's.